And welcome to CMC. We're gonna get rolling with the forum today. I'm Mike Voinovich, a member of CMC's Board of Trustees and the Office Managing Partner of BDO here in Columbus. It's great to see everyone here today. Today's forum, Immigration, Islamophobia, and National Security, was developed in partnership with the Columbus Council on World Affairs, represented here by many of their members and friends. Won't you please help me in thanking them? A quick note, as Andy already mentioned earlier, we will be handling audience questions today via being submitted in writing. Within your forum flyers, you have a piece of paper. Please include your name, your question, and we'll collect these about midway through the discussion for consideration. The United States is a nation founded and built by immigrants. We are better as a nation, as a society, when we are guided by the principle of being opening and welcoming to all. Recent rhetoric, however, does not seem to reflect this simple tenet of our democracy, and we may find ourselves far worse off because of it. So let's listen to some of those who are dealing with this issue firsthand. So please welcome, today we have Executive Director at the Community Refugee and Immigration Services, Angela Plummer. We have Executive President of the Noor Islamic Community Center, Imran Malik, Principal of Columbus North International School, Kenny Lee, and certainly our host, President and CEO of the Columbus Council on World Affairs, Patrick Tyrion.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to the Columbus Metropolitan Club for this partnership. We're always pleased to partner and show how global affairs and local affairs are intermingled. So United States of America, being an American, what's the role of new Americans in our local community, in our nation, to our economy, to our democracy? These are the questions and thoughts we're going to explore today in a discussion with people who live on the ground, interacting with, understanding and seeing our new Americans in the life they live here in the Columbus area. So we at the Columbus Council on World Affairs for more than 40 years have been about education, about bridging cultures and gaps and bringing people together and bringing understanding about the world and why you should care. And we have students, 600 of them, thinking about how do I interact with people from different cultures and why? So the recent election and executive order brought serious pause to us as an organization and was the impetus for the conversation with the Metropolitan Club. Hey, let's get the community talking about this. Because obviously there's a big portion of the community that doesn't share the same views. And so how might we work together to think through that as one America, as one Columbus? Now, we initially tried to get some national security experts from the Department of Homeland Security, and they were very helpful, but they're very busy because they're trying to figure out how to implement the executive order, so they couldn't be here today. So we're going to focus most of our conversations around how are these changes, these policies and perceptions impacting day-to-day life here in Columbus for our new Americans. We are here to discuss, and one of the ways we thought we'd invigorate that is through the Q&A by a note card. So in our experience at the Council on World Affairs, we get a lot more questions when you write it down because not everyone likes to get up to the mic. The other reason we do that is so we don't have too much pontificating or side comments, and this topic is one that I'm sure there are a lot of people here that would love to have this mic, and so we're not giving that to you today. So. But we are giving you the pen, which was how our founders made change. So we encourage you to be like them. We're going to start off kind of with some of the definitions of immigrants, refugees, sort of what's the reality around the executive order, help us understand what it is, then move to some of the impact and how it's being seen in its implementation in terms of both policy and the perceptions of Americans. And then at the end, before we all leave, and hopefully, well, we all want to leave somewhat up, somewhere a little bit higher from where we left, a little bit more elevated, and so we'll talk about the road forward. How can we be productive in being change agents for our community? I may play devil's advocate a little bit. Don't necessarily take what I say as my beliefs, nor those of the Council on World Affairs, because I can get kind of crazy and say things that may be unsaid by many of you or others that aren't in this room, but that I think warrants being asked. So let's start with some introductions, though, first, because you didn't really get to hear about the organizations that each represent. So if we start here with Angie, try to condense all you do in your life and your organization to like a minute or two on start with you, Angie. And I may cut you off, and it's, please just know that it's courtesy for the audience and no disrespect, so. Angie.
Well, I think if we all sang the preamble again, it would put me at ease. So I'm the executive director of CRIS, Community Refugee and Immigration Services. One of our largest programs has been to resettle refugees directly from overseas. We work with two national organizations, Church World Service and Episcopal Migration Ministries. So that starts with meeting people at the airport, helping them find housing, getting kids in school, health screenings, all those things that happen in the first 90 days. After that, we have programs that pick up with helping people to become self-sufficient and integrated. So that's employment preparation, lots of partnerships with local employers that are willing to hire limited English proficient folks, English classes. We have a legal services program that has, on a walk-in basis, 2 days a week, we see anybody who wants to consult with a lawyer. And a whole host of social services running the age spectrum from working with the Help Me Grow program to detect developmental delays in children, parenting programs, to the other end of the age spectrum, working specifically to target the senior refugee population, because adjustment is much more challenging if you come to a new country as a senior citizen. And then programs that help with victims of crime. We have a new mentorship program that we're working with Kenny School. So we're really pleased with how that's helping to bridge youth and the community at large.
Great, thank you. For those of you that aren't refugees or immigrants, or even if you are, the way you can get involved with CRIS, they're having a run for refugees in April. And so you may see me there running. Imran?
I guess my 90-second start right now.
Yes, 84.
I'm Imran Malik. I'm the executive president for Noor Islamic Culture Center. That happens to be one of the largest Islamic centers in the entire Ohio right now. According to ISNA, which is Islamic Society of North America, if we are not the top 3, we are among the top 10 Islamic centers in the country right now. It is not the size of our campus that defines us, it is the amount of activities that happens out there. You name it, outreach, interfaith, educational, social, religious, cultural. We have, our congregation is about 6,000 people on our mailing list. We serve, again, majority of the western side of the Metro Columbus area. We have one of the largest weekend schools, which serves about 900 students. These are the children who actually come to Noor Islamic Culture Center for different programs and activities on Saturdays and Sundays. Again, this is a 6,000 congregant membership, which also comprises 40 different ethnicities. So if you ever need a translator for a different language, please reach out to us. We can definitely find someone from our community who can volunteer that. We have also been successfully able to do a lot of interfaith work within the suburban parts of the town. Interfaith has been our solid foundation and our cohesive kind of alliances. Historically, the interfaith work has always been more of a metro concept. But since the operation of Noor Islamic Culture Center since 2012, we have been successfully able to have a suburban momentum of interfaith dialogue as well. Organizations like Safe Alliances of Interfaith Leadership, which was formed back in 2012, was an effort of Noor getting engaged with all the churches and the synagogues in the suburban areas. In addition, we also have ICO, which is the Interfaith Association of Central Ohio, based in downtown, which is one of the oldest interfaith alliances or organization in Columbus area. They also have been actually replicating and working with our footprint to replicate other dialogues in other parts of Columbus as well. So again, there's a lot that we do as a center, as an organization, and it's only possible with the friendship and partnership that we have received from the other faith-based communities. So I'll keep it to that point at this point, since 90 seconds are done, but we'll come back to more of our activities here in the rest of the details.
Imran. And I know you have a table here of colleagues who I met. Thank you to you as well. I'm also excited to try Islam 101. It's a program on Saturdays that they run at the center. So some of you may want to do that too. Thank you. Kenny Lee.
Hi, I'm Kenny Lee. I'm the principal at Columbus North International School. We are located in Clintonville, the Old North High School. We are a 7 to 12 building. We serve approximately 650 students. Our focus is on languages and also global learning, and we accomplish that through a variety of partnerships, including with Chris and the CCWA. The 6 languages we offer are Arabic, Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, French, and Russian. And so it's really neat because you could walk into our school and you could hear not just those languages, but up to about 20 different languages and dialects being spoken. We have students representing 5 continents. Our staff is extremely diverse. And so it's really neat to see a blending. It's a great visual to see students from different faiths and different cultures mixing together and having these conversations. And one of the things that we've really tried to promote as a school is with our students is the power of language. When they learn a foreign language and they are able to use that to acquire a job, it's pretty powerful for them. And I think it's really we're really working to create relevancy within connecting the languages and also the global learning component. So that's really what we've been doing.
Great. Now, can you say that in maybe 6 of the languages that you teach? Go ahead.
I can't,
Go
but
ahead.
a student could.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Let's kind of move into definitions and first talk about the recent executive order. So I have it here. I printed it off. It's on whitehouse.gov for anyone that really wants to see it. And then maybe, Angie, you could, your background as a lawyer might be able to help you make sense of the 8-page document and kind of tell us what's in it. But it's called Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but let me just read the first line. By the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, blah, 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 and to protect the nation from terrorist activities by foreign nationals admitted to the United States, it is hereby ordered. What was ordered on March 6th? Can you help us understand what is in this executive order? Angie? It's great being the moderator. It's great.
So that was just Monday. Oh my goodness, and now it's Friday. So this is the second one. The first order was, and then there have been several executive orders, but the one that relates mostly to the refugee program and other travelers from certain countries. First order was January 27th, and as many of you may know, much of that order was, there was an injunction, and so much of that order was on appeal. A provision in that original order that was enacted at that time was still the reduction in the total refugee numbers Every year, the president will set the annual ceiling for refugees, and President Obama had set it at the beginning of the fiscal year. So for October 1st, 2016, it was set at 110,000. This executive order cut the total ceiling down to 50,000. That has been in effect since the first order happened. So now we have the new order, and its intent is to roll out this ban in a smoother fashion by not applying to people who are permanent residents. It has, one change is that Iraq is no longer on the list, so it covers the countries of Sudan, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and Iran. So it prevents, and there are timing issues. It goes into effect on March the 16th. So there's a little bit more of a rollout time period. So people who already have been granted visas by a certain date should be allowed to travel. People who have green cards can travel. But what it does is essentially guts the refugee program. And a big piece of it is this, what's characterized as a pause of 120 days. Refugee processing is already very complicated. There's a significant vetting process. And something to keep in mind is different travelers to the United States have a different process by which they come. Refugees have had their own process that has been continuously revised and have the most thorough vetting process of any people who travel to the United States. So those countries that were put onto the list, what happened was that under the Obama administration, they decided there would no longer be a visa waiver program, so you couldn't just come into the US without applying for a visa. That's what that was about. It never banned people from coming to the United States, and so I think that's been represented in a different way than the original intent. So what that means is that because 35,000 refugees have already come nationwide this year, there are only 15,000 more who will be allowed for the rest of the federal fiscal year. So our office has already received 430 people so far this fiscal year. And plans are made at the beginning of the year. You have staffing that you carefully built with language capacity to help the people who are coming. So that means we'll have no income for those 4 months that this pause is in effect. And this counts on day 121 that the machinery will be operating, while we already know Homeland Security is not doing interviews. So we have many people that were approved to come, that were just waiting for travel, who are not allowed to come. Their medical exams will expire, their security clearances will expire, and it's a very narrow window in which they can depart. And so unless there's a lot of pressure on that, are we really going to call this a pause and have it be a pause, and on day 121 people can come, that the administration gets the machinery going? It's not a pause. It's really, really detrimental to the long-standing tradition, proud tradition that this country has welcomed refugees in a time when we have more vulnerable people around the world than ever before. The U.S. has traditionally been a leader in that effort, and we're really stepping back from that role.
Thank you. And can you help us understand, you mentioned the word refugee. Can you describe the definition differences, immigrant, refugee,
yes.
asylee?
So there's an umbrella term, alien. That would mean all non-citizens. Within that category, you have immigrants and non-immigrants. So immigrants, generally speaking, come either through a family-based sponsorship or an employer-based sponsorship. And immigrants, the other term you'll hear, green card holder, lawful permanent resident, all that means the same thing. Your non-immigrants are people who come as students, as visitors, just temporarily, and then they are expected to return. Then you have refugees and asylee, and the definition, the legal definition, is the same, that it's someone who's fled their country of origin because of persecution based on some enumerated reasons. So for the Bhutanese, you all may know we have the largest Bhutanese refugee population in the country in Columbus. So they left Bhutan, they were kicked out of Bhutan and were in Nepal. So they, because they were out of their country of origin, they're considered by definition refugees. The companion term asylee, it's the same overall definition, but you might think of it as where someone gets permission to be in the U.S. So every person coming through the U.S. refugee program is approved before they ever get on an airplane and set foot in the United States. Asylees, they show up and then they ask for protection once they're here. So what's happening in Europe, for example, when people are crossing the Mediterranean and showing up in Italy and Greece, those are asylum seekers. So that's different than what we have here in terms of the U.S. refugee program. You might say people coming across the southern border from Central America seeking safety, those are asylum seekers. Does that help?
That's very, very helpful. Yes, thank you. I want to get back to immigrants because I want to ask, does the executive order, in your understanding, relate to immigrants not from those countries? You know, I think about what I hear about undocumented immigrants from Latin America or Mexico, and does this speak to that at all? I mean, I only got through a little bit of this.
The one you're reading, less so, but there is an executive order that applies to interior enforcement that will definitely impact the undocumented community and the priorities that have been set for who may be rounded up for deportation.
Got it. Okay. Now, Imran, maybe I can switch to you and think about this from, I know the first executive order mentioned Islam, or at least Muslim countries. This one is seemingly, well, it doesn't, focusing more on countries that are sponsor terrorism or in civil conflict as the reason for being on the list. How is your community, obviously it's a broad term, but what are some of the ways you're seeing both the executive order and the election of the new president impacting your community?
I think there's, as Angie mentioned, there's quite a bit of impact to, especially the immigrant community. When taking the immigrant community in a definition that, you know, those are the pullers actually. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a definition that was exposed to me, and that was the push and the pull phenomena. Push is the refugees and asylees definition that fits them, and pull is the immigrant definition for like people who seek American dream and people who move from different parts of the world in lieu of economical or financial stability, and they can maybe through a corporation or through the families, like sponsoring them. So a lot of folks, I'm pretty sure, sitting in this room are all pullers, because somewhere in your genealogy you were probably an immigrant to the United States of America. But asylees or refugees are the pushers, because they are fleeing their countries because of civil chaos or atrocity or dictatorship that has made their life unbearable. So Columbus happens to be the second largest Somalian population immigration hub in the country after Minneapolis. The last I was told by one of the Somali leaders, there are about 75,000 Somalis in this area, and about 27,000 of them are naturalized citizens. Now the remainder are probably in the process of naturalization, or they're probably green card holders, and majority of that remainder are also people who are in dangling status. They are still in the asylum status as far as their immigration is concerned. Those are the people who are more vulnerable. Now you also take it to the Syrian and the Iraqi communities, who are kind of new refugee communities within the area, and there's definitely quite a few thousand people of the members in our community that belong to those ethnicities. The issue is that with this uncertainty of traveling ban, like for 120 days, if you understand how the refugees actually get here, and as Sanji mentioned earlier, the process is already very extensive. The vetting process or the diligence process is very extensive, through which they go through before they even are allowed to enter the United States. We have had situations, especially Care Ohio, I know representation is here today. They can maybe speak on one-on-one later as well. We have had families who are half immigrants, half refugee immigrants, and half of them are still in other parts of the world living in refugee camps. If a critical emergency situation occurs for a mother who is here with one of her child and other child is in refugee camp, there is no guarantee, there is no certainty that if she leaves the country, she is going to be allowed to come back. And there's not even possibility that if she will be guaranteed to get reunited with that child who is living in another refugee camp in another part of the world. So yes, there's a lot of situations that have been brought to our attention as community. But unfortunately, like any other religious institution, our organization is also volunteer-based. there's only that much burden that we as a community can take, whether it's financial burden or whether it's a social supporting burden that we can extend. Our city has taken a great stand. We want to continue as a sanctuary city. Mayor Ginther has signed that the order, adapted that order, that Columbus will continue to stay as a sanctuary city. Would that possibly result in cutting of the federal funding for all the immigration programs that especially Angie is supporting? What would that impact be, and how we will be able to cater to those vulnerable in our community is a big question mark that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis as of now. Executive Order 2.0 is nothing different than Executive Point 1.0. It's just a better and brushed up version of the previous order. It is, again, anti-American, that's what we call it, because these are not the value system that our Constitution and our civilization has stood behind. America is always to lead by example. We are the global leaders. If we are going to set such precedences out there in the global arena, what are those countries where dictatorship and human rights is already at jeopardy will do? Believe it or not, we have a lot of animosity in the rest of the world, but at the end of the day, people do follow because we are the trendsetter as well.
So Imran, let me do a follow-up question. Given that the executive order limits 6 countries now, there's a lot more countries that are predominantly Muslim and where Muslims come to the United States. So does that mean everything's fine then now? I mean, is the Muslim community in Columbus feeling fine?
I don't think any Muslim immigrant family or a refugee or asylum family in asylum status is feeling safe at this point of time, because it's just a matter of time that today we have 6 countries, tomorrow it can be another 12. But I think what we have to understand is that we are living in a global village. We cannot recess into our bubbles. We have to lead by example, and we are the global leaders, and we expect, and the rest of the world expect us that we are always there to support those who are fallen down. If we are going to deteriorate ourselves and derail from those value systems, then I think our civilization and the very entity for which America stands for is in jeopardy.
Well said. Now I'm going to ask Kenny, as we move into day-to-day at schools, sometimes we think young people are isolated from what's happening in the news and in the politics. I know from our work with 600 high schools in the area that it's not. And if you're a Muslim young woman who's wearing a headscarf, you more than likely than not have gotten much more antagonism towards you. And the students talk about that in our programs. Kenny has a very diverse population as well. And I just thought we could ask him, how are you seeing it play out? And I'm not just talking about the executive order, but all the divisive rhetoric from the campaign on about immigrants and refugees and Muslims. Can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, I know there are educators in the room, and again, I think the whole phenomenon has manifested itself in different ways in different schools and in different areas. I can tell you, in my school, and I can also probably say in the Columbus City School District, it got real November 9th. I remember walking in that day, the day after the election, and there was just a feeling. The students were quiet, and I guess to paint the most accurate picture, it was almost, they had something they wanted to ask and they wanted to say, but there was a hesitation there. And throughout the course of the day, students started to speak up. And I would say from that day up until today, I've heard probably more than I've ever heard. Mr. Lee, what does this mean? Mr. Lee, what's going to happen? Mr. Lee, I heard this. And I was talking to some of you about, I'm a former social studies teacher, and I can tell you the level of civic engagement among high school students right now is probably as high as it's ever been. Again, why is that? But more and more students are asking, what's an executive order? What is the power of the executive branch? And the checks and balance system and the separation of powers. And they're asking these questions, and they're doing research, and they are learning, and we've had conversations about news sources, and where is the news coming from? So from an education standpoint, it's been very powerful. And I can tell you, on November 9th, I was talking to Dr. Good, and he had a superintendent's advisory that day, and he even saw within that group of students, they had an agenda set, but he noticed there was something that those students wanted to say, but they didn't say it just yet until he essentially asked, what's going on, guys? And it started to come out, and the students started to ask questions, and he talked about basically changing up the agenda on that day to address some of their very real concerns. You know, I can tell you, it is not uncommon now to have a student, I see a student in the hallway, why are you upset? And they'll talk about something that's happening to a relative, something they heard on the news that, again, could impact them. Imran's example, we have families, you know, they are worried that if a relative gets sick in another country, in one of the countries potentially on the ban, would they be able to get there? Would the person that is currently there be able to come back and visit? You know, and this is the story that I guess for me, you know, we're entering graduation season. We have a senior whose mom has been in Africa and has been working and ever since I've known the senior, she has been, she's talked about having her mom at her graduation. And I can tell you that after, in the recent events and since November, that is a big question mark now. And so for 3 years, this high school senior has dreamed about, one, being obviously a high school graduate, but celebrating with her mother and her family who would come over and celebrate with her. But now that's a big question mark right now. So when I say it's been real, it's become real, and it's in education we're seeing it in different ways. Those are some of the examples that we're seeing.
Are you, either of you seeing and have examples that are similar to that with your constituents? And Angie, you want to start?
Well, I'd like to tell you about Muna, whose story is unique but is representative of many other families that we work with. And Chris resettled Muna and her husband Bashir and their daughter, who was about 13 at the time, in 2013. And Bashir had a heart condition, so Muna was the one to work and provide for the family from the time that they got here. So they came in March of 2013, and Muna is immediately in our office asking about how to apply for her 2 children that were left behind. And there's so many reasons why kids get left behind: family structure, flight, you know, some kids are with grandma and somebody's got the other kids, and so all kinds of things happen. And parents have to make terrible decisions to decide, do I leave these behind and try to make a go of it and then apply once I get there? And so that's what Muna did. So Muna applied for her kids in May of 2013, and through our office, through this prescribed process, and she waited and waited, and she paid for DNA testing, and they did DNA testing, and the kids were really at the end of the process. And one of the children, the daughter, has cerebral palsy and is really often not well. And so we were trying to get this case expedited, and there was actually a niece who ended up being able to come before the siblings were able to come. And part of that is because the brother is Somali, and so he has an extra layer of security checks that happen. And so the brother and sister's cases are what we call cross-referenced, hard cross-reference, so they can't travel without each other. So then we have the ban, and I get to tell Muna again she's still going to be waiting, and I don't know how long it's going to be. And what you should know about refugee processing is there's an opportunity once a year, once every 6 months to be re-interviewed. So those children's medical exams have expired now. and here we are. So again, Muna's, she's had a hard life, and she's just trying to live in the same country with her children. And why shouldn't that be? It's pretty simple.
Add something to that.
Please.
I actually want to take you to the little bit different general and more broader spectrum here. I know there are a lot of individual cases that we can talk about. Unfortunately, we are living through that reality in that challenging time. But I think what the biggest concern that the immigrant community or the refugee community is facing right now is that this executive order or anything that's going to come further that's going to create further divide in our nation is an alarming, concern. We already have witnessed, since the president has taken over office, 4 mosques nationwide have been burnt down. The Jewish community have received 150 bomb threats and threats in general to their communities. An Indian person was shot dead in Kansas City, and another was shot in Lancaster, I think North Carolina, but luckily he survived. So I think the problem is that if we did not make a stop to these fear-mongering and hate-mongering speeches and actions of our leadership, it is only going to bring worse in our nation. And America is a sanctuary city, a sanctuary country. It's not a sanctuary city. So that's why a lot of people have immigrated to this part of the world, because for safety and for better economical opportunities. Muslim community brings a lot of opportunities to, and adds a lot of value to the American civilization itself. There are 10% of 200,000 doctors nationwide are Muslim doctors, Muslim physicians. 23% of entrepreneurs are actually Muslims, and they hire on the average 5 to 10 people and add value to the economical cycles of our country as well. And the same goes for the Jewish, for the Italian, for the Indian, for the Hindu, and other immigrant communities as well. So we have to understand at the end of the day that we cannot let this divide go further, because our nation needs healing, and it's only going to happen when we outreach, when we reach out to each other and put a stop to all this that's happening as lunacy. There definitely security is a concern. We all understand that, and especially those who have adapted America as their home, they definitely want America to be safe, secure, and progressive. But there are other ways of keeping the country safe. DHS itself has told the executive branch that putting this ban in place is not making us any safer than what we were before the election. So I think it's about time that the executive committee or the executive administration listens to its own agencies as well. So.
And I remember reading about the new National Security Advisor who has differing views on what the president has called radical Islamic terrorism. He has told his staff and folks that he considers terrorism un-Muslim, not being a good Muslim. So even within the administration and its team, there's discord on this topic. Let's go to some questions from the audience. Thank you, and feel free not to include your name if you want to ask a question that you don't want anyone to know who it is. It's fine with me. This one refers to ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Thank you. Yes. Is ICE actively picking up illegal immigrants and refugees in our community? Anyone know? Have examples of that or hearing about that?
You've heard a few scenarios and a few cases that have been reported. I think CARE might, if we have a representation from CARE, they might be better able to answer if any of the Muslim community members have been kind of harassed or picked up by, ICE in general. I know Jennifer was here.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing it much more with the Latino and Hispanic community right now. It certainly affects our community as well, like not on such a large scale. But, bringing our application
Thank you. For those who couldn't hear, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, was saying that there are reports of that, and mainly with the Hispanic, did you say? Population here in Columbus. So the next question asks a similar vein question. Why is it that some Mexican immigrants have to sneak across the border? Wouldn't they be permitted to cross at the gate? I realize they may not be permitted to stay in the U.S., but why climb the wall? Anyone know the answer to that? We may not know all the answers, by the way, just so you know. Do you know?
That's a long discussion, but essentially, I mean, there is a process in place. The shorter answer is it could take years and years and years and years, and our economy, the demands from our economy don't really match our immigration system and the numbers and slots that are available, and so I think it's been more of an economic pull factor that folks are coming. So there is a path to do that for some people, but it's a long, long, long wait. That's a really oversimplified answer.
Well, here's another follow-up to the earlier question. Are the Hispanics that are being reached by ICE, are there deportations happening? Anyone heard of that or know any?
Again, I think when they retain someone or they arrest someone, there's a different process that goes through. I mean, of course, there's a federal process that they have to go through. I do believe there is some form of petition that's available out there that you can, the friends or the family can file on behalf of them. But again, there's a complete federal process that happens before the deportation actually kicks in. So, yeah.
How about in schools?
Yeah, we've had some students who have had relatives, and in the example I gave, a student got a phone call in the middle of class and saying that a relative was being detained, and so again, there are so many questions that then come from that student, and I think as an educator and even as professionals, we don't have all the answers, and we're, one of the things that I think as a school that we're working really to do is provide social and emotional support, but also resources, and that's where Chris has been very, very helpful for our students because there are so many questions, and to pair them up with an adult who has maybe gone through a similar path is reassuring, and it's comforting for the students, and I think that's really what I've been trying to do for a lot of these students who are going through these scenarios that we're talking about, is to connect them with resources and really to have an open ear. And that's where, if any of you are interested, in being part of that process, please, come talk to me, and we can definitely set something up. And to be a mentor goes a really, really long way with a lot of these students.
Great. Before I leave, Kenny, this question is directed to you. Please speak to the initiative, ability, behavior, and academic success of the refugee and immigrant students. Thanks.
So we do have a lot of refugee students, and one of the things that I would encourage everybody to do is do a little Google search on refugee camps around the world, and to look at a school in one of these refugee camps, and I think we would be very hard-pressed to consider it a school. And so these students are coming over, and I can speak to the high school, for example. They're coming over 16, 17 years old with very limited English to maybe no English. And I can tell you, obviously the goal is to get them a diploma. But I use this example. If we took any one of us, English proficient, and put us in a country that we did not know the language and said, we want you to graduate high school in 3 years, you have to earn 22 credits and pass 7 proficiency tests in that language, could we do it in 3 years? And so I can tell you for the refugee populations that we have, the playing field is not level. And so one of the things that we are trying to do is level the playing field. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that we're trying to do is to look at classes that are dual language immersion. So you take our Nepali population, which is pretty high, refugee population is pretty high. So it would be taking a science class that would be taught 50% in Nepali, 50% in English. And again, using the example of us, would we want, if we were taking a science class that we had to pass and we had to take a test on, 50% in English that we would be proficient in, and then 50% in the native language that we would have to take the test in. So I think that's a model that we are looking to implement on a broader scale next year for our refugee population, to level that playing field, to put them in a position to be successful. Because I can tell you right now that a lot of the refugees, that they're not put in a position to be successful by the system. So we're personally trying to change the rules of the system to enable them to have some success.
There's also been, I've heard talk of, and maybe Imran, you can speak to this, adjusting requirements within schools to allow native speakers, heritage speakers to, instead of having to learn a second language, which would actually be a third, to be, checked. You got the language requirement because you speak another language already, but that's apparently not the way the schools currently do it.
Yes, I think it's a very important question, and I'm glad that you brought it up. We are in the western part of the Greater Columbus area, so we definitely work with the Hilliard School District and the Dublin School District quite often, because majority of our congregation and their children do attend those schools in those districts. We have done a lot of diversity and sensitivity trainings for the teachers in both school districts, but I think now the challenge that we are kind of working with is we are working with the ESCs, which is the Educational Service Centers for Central Ohio. We're working with Dr. Tom Reed, who is actually taking a proactive approach to look into modifying and editing the curriculum of middle school and high school or in most of the school districts, because according to some studies, there is an anticipation that by year 2022 or 2024, there will be about 500,000 immigrant students in overall Greater Columbus School District area. So in order for us to provide the opportunity for our children to live in the global village, how to work with diversity, we have to come out of that gridlock of our curriculums. Our curriculums right now are very Judeo-Christian. We have to make sure that we are preparing our children for the future of a globalized world. So it's going to take quite a bit of work from all major ethnicities that reside in Columbus area, but our hopes are that if we are able to build that model in Columbus, then we can replicate it in other parts of the country as well. So that's definitely a very important aspect that we are looking into, and hopefully that will nullify a lot of hate mongering and exposure to a lot of hate just being a Judeo-Christian curriculum within our school district for the future of our country. So.
We are actually, for some of our populations, Patrick, you brought up a point of testing them in their language so that they can earn credit. We are actually doing that on a small scale. We'd love to broaden the scale, but we have students who are testing. For example, we had a student who came to us who, I can't remember the West African country, but he basically earned 3 credits of French because he tested because French was one of the languages that he spoke in his home country. He came to the United States. We were able to test him, and he earned 3 credits of French, which enables him long-term not only to put those credits in his pocket, but it enables him to take other classes that will help him graduate faster. One of the barriers to that, though, is finding tests in some of the languages that the students are coming to us in. So, but we are trying to broaden that, because that's a great way to, like I said, level the playing field a little bit for the students.
We're going to wrap up here, and I wanted to leave on the what can we do piece, because the majority of the questions here are actually how can we help, what can we do, what are you doing? So I'm going to read them all together and then ask the panelists maybe in a minute just to say what are you doing or what can we do as a broader community. This one says 5 states have sued to block Executive Order 2.0. What can individuals do to support these suits in court? When facing those who are not friendly to these conversations, what are some effective talking points we can use? How can we get involved with Chris, Noor Islamic Center, and Columbus North International School, besides money and finances? So maybe you could take the last couple minutes and say first, Angie, you, what is it that you're doing? What can we do to move in a positive direction?
So the silver lining in all this really difficult time for all of us is the engagement that we've seen. People who are having fundraising events for us, spontaneous things that I'm having trouble keeping track of. It's so encouraging to have people reach out to us to say, we don't like the direction this is going and we want to help you. We think this is important to continue. So there was something at the kitchen last week. There was a Pints for Purpose event. We have sort of two campaigns going right now. They do involve raising money because we're trying to survive. So we have our 5K race on April 29th, and all this is on our website. And we're also doing pretty much a social media campaign, 100K in 100 days. So it's people starting their own small fundraisers with their neighbors and friends to try to get friends to donate $20, and all that really adds up. One of our best volunteer opportunities had been being a welcome team for refugees, getting that interaction between families, incoming refugee families and groups here. And we want that to continue when the refugees start coming. We have opportunities for language partners. The mentorship program is one that is obviously growing and in great need. There's so many different ways, whether it's you're an employer and you want to talk about jobs for refugees who are here, or partnering with us. So
yep. There was a question in there too from an employer. By the way, at your tables is what can you do to help? So we've got contacts from each of these. Imran, was there one thing you might want to mention, and then Kenny, and then we'll be kicking it back to Mike to close the program.
I might want to say maybe more than one thing. I definitely don't want to sound very pessimist. I'm a very optimistic person, and I also want to share, there's a lot of positive that's also going on in our communities and societies in general. While there's a lot of hate and fear-mongering that we all hear in the social media and media in general, there's a lot of positive that's also going on in our communities. Every week since the president's taken the office, we are receiving about 10 to 15 cards of love, care, support from all over the country. People that we have never gotten in communication with, they are sending their cares and their prayers for us, and in general to the Muslim community and the communities who are on the vulnerability side. So it's very important that we understand that, yes, there's a lot of work that we all have to do, and it's doable because in the past our country has gone through these emotional tests and traumas, and we have always stood in solidarity, and I think this time should not be any different than what we have done in the past. We have seen this similar kind of harassment done to the Jewish community, to the African Americans, to the Japanese, to the Italians, to the Germans. Unfortunately, it's the Muslim community on the forefront right now. I think together everyone achieves more. If we show more solidarity by coming to events like these, raising awareness, and then taking upon ourselves to do service-oriented projects, I think that's where our biggest dent to the hate will occur. We, again, cannot sit idle. We cannot sit back. We just have to continue doing the status quo, what we are doing here today. And I hope, sir, that this is not the only conversation we're going to have. We're going to have a lot more of these frequent engagements and participations together, and that's the only way we can make a difference. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you very much, Imran. And Kenny already gave his earlier. He said, be a mentor. So contact Kenny if you need it. Mike, please close out the program for us.
Great. Well, thank you to our speakers. This is certainly a complex topic, and one that it's great to see that we have great community support and leadership. I hope you enjoyed the forum. We encourage you to continue. We'd ask that you continue the conversation with coffee and cookies in the back. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Please help me thank our partners, the Columbus Council on World Affairs, and our speakers, Angela Plummer, Imran Malik, Kenny Lee, Patrick Tyrion, and thank you to all of you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.